A dramatic report issued just 2 days ago from the United Nations on climate change, perhaps the most stunning and the most serious and the scariest report on climate change that we have seen so far. Daniel Stone covers these issues for National Geographic magazine. Good friend of the program here in the studio this morning with us. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, sir.
What's different about this report? What does it tell us that we didn't already know?
This report is very different from what we've seen from the UN in the past. Usually we've seen a bunch of charts and graphs that say these are the trends of the climate changing. This report is saying not only are we sure now that the climate is changing, humans are the main driving cause behind it, and we are on very shaky footing. The world is not prepared, and the world will not be prepared on the current path for a lot of the environmental and humanitarian changes coming our way.
The headline that I saw yesterday, what I took away from just the news articles I've read, you've read the report, correct?
Yes.
What I read from the news articles is that the climate change is having an impact on every one of the continents today, on the world's oceans today, and is only going to get worse.
It'll get worse. And it says this in very clear language.
The worst is yet to come, right?
No one in the world will be spared of many of the harshest effects. So you're talking about changes in the ocean.
I was going to say, what is the evidence that they show that
a lot of
climate change is real?
Climate forecasting is done by modeling. We know this. It's a very scientific process. They put in some inputs. They get a lot of outputs. But they follow trend lines that have been occurring for the past decade. The past 10 years have been the hottest decade ever recorded. And they look at what that's caused. And that causes major superstorms like we've seen, with droughts in California, Hurricane Sandy, those types of events that are happening more frequently, and the effects that changing weather and dramatically changing weather has on our food supply, has on our energy supply, our transportation, and with mass migrations of people and where they are living around the world, and which areas are most viable for them.
Have they? Is there any evidence yet that species are moving because of climate, or have we gotten there yet?
I think
either plant or animals.
Species move all the time for many reasons, and sometimes in parts of Africa it's just to get water, and so that's a weather-related cause. Now we don't see entire movements of entire species to a different continent to escape climate change, but these things happen slowly. But as this report says, these types of events will begin to be a lot more frequent.
Here's the thing that if I could for a moment play devil's avocado.
Sure.
Because you always hear the same arguments from people who don't believe in climate change, right? Like, oh, this is a cycle, the earth moves in cycles, and we're just in one of these periods. What's the argument against that?
Certainly the speed. The speed this time. These changes, dramatic changes in the Earth's climate, have happened before, many times in the past. They work in cycles, but never in a decade or 2 decades at most.
Right.
And we see these trend lines getting steeper and steeper, even sometimes by the month. Climate generally works over centuries, not over decades. So measuring the input, and the input in this scenario is the carbon pollution that we're putting into the atmosphere, carbon dioxide and methane. If you measure those inputs and you survey the outputs, you could see that there is a major new driver that has never been a factor in global climate before, and that is us.
I was watching a special report on this on NBC News last night, Brian Williams, and they showed that wheat and corn yields of wheat and corn crops are already decreasing because of more CO2 in the atmosphere. Coral reefs, because there's more CO2 in the oceans, coral reefs are dying. You go to the Great Barrier Reefs maybe 30 years from now, and you're just going to see a pile of rocks. There'll be no Great Barrier Reef. Even the shellfish industry on the West Coast is now starting to see the impacts. Oysters not able to reproduce shells. God forbid, no more oysters from Tomales Bay or whatever. But so my question is, when you see all of this, this is real. You can measure it, right? What the hell is it going to take before people take this seriously?
Well, this is a scientific issue, but we also know it's a very strong economic issue. That's why we can't encourage China or India, which are growing economies, to reduce the amount of carbon they're putting into the air. That's why you can't get a consensus in this country to commit to a plan to reduce the amount of coal and oil and gas that we burn that puts carbon pollution into the air. fossil fuel energy is the cheapest kind of energy. And that's not trivial. It's dramatically cheaper. We get more than 60% of the power in this country from fossil fuels. And to reduce that to zero or near it is a proposition that would cost trillions of dollars. So it's not just a public will and people should come around. It's an economic issue.
And a political issue. And for whatever reason, right, it seems that that the naysayers, particularly the Republicans in the United States Senate, they rule the roost. They're able to block any legislation, and either they don't believe it, that it's happening, or they don't believe humankind, that we're responsible for it, or whatever.
Yeah, it's still a puzzle to me how this became a very partisan issue. People believe it and people don't on party lines. But
I would think that the survival of the human species would not be a partisan issue, or protecting the planet would not be a partisan issue. But I guess maybe I'm just old-fashioned. By the way, I've got to say, this book here, I just finished. I wanted to read this book so badly that I went away for 10 days to Hawaii and secluded myself on a beach on Kauai. But I did, and I read this book.
To read about science.
The Sixth Extinction by Elizabeth Colbert. I don't know what
Colbert.
Colbert. I call her Colbert in honor of Stephen Colbert. A book that I was loaned by my friend Daniel Stone, by the way. But what really comes across in this is we talk about invasive species, like that in Hawaii they brought in the mongoose to get rid of the snakes, and now the mongoose is killing all the birds. Right, happened years ago. But the biggest invasive species I've ever seen on this planet, right? It's you and me. It's all of us, right?
Everywhere on the planet, we've had some sort of impact. And now our impact is with the weather. But as the weather changes and the climate changes, we're going to have more of these impacts like invasive species, dying coral reefs, like you mentioned, and differences in agriculture and how we're going to have to...
But it's not an exaggeration, is it, to say that with this invasive species, namely us, that we might end up not only destroying other species, but destroying ourselves.
Yeah, that's very possible. And the Sixth Extinction, as the book is titled, this is the sixth time in the planet's history. This is the fastest that we've ever seen species collapse. And it could, like you said, end with the entire human race, or a good chunk of us won't make it.
Only rats and cockroaches.
Is there any good news that we can talk about? Like, is there any was there anything good in this report that we can something that indicates that we can slow this down, or that how we combat this? Because there's a lot of doom and gloom in this.
For early in the morning, especially too. This report is a collection of about over scientists from over 50 countries are essentially sounding this alarm and saying we might be screwed if we don't do something right now. That's
how many scientists from over
50 countries?
Right. That was another thing that's remarkable about this report. This is not like one university, a couple of professors at this university. There are like every nation in the United Nations.
Right.
Yeah,
has signed on to this report.
It wasn't a scientific study sanctioned by the coal industry. Weird.
No.
Weird.
Yeah. But this is a report that maybe even James Inhofe should maybe pay some attention.
You're awfully optimistic this morning.
But I'll tell you, I don't think this is doom and gloom that this report came out. I think it is great this report came out, because we really need a wake up call. We need a lot of wake up calls. But my belief is that we'll have to lose Miami before people take it seriously. Mm-hmm. Which would not be a bad loss as far as I'm concerned.
Sorry, Miami.
But if it's not Miami, there will have to be some parts of some coastal cities, particularly on the East Coast. Just because we're not that affected on the West Coast, but wherever it is, or some parts of the world where they lose an island. Where I think it's already happening, where people have to leave an island or something, or a population has to relocate because of the rising sea levels before people say, damn it, this is really happening. And then it may be too late.
There's a great show on HBO, Vice, the Vice show, that they've done some great stuff on climate change. Last season, they talked all about Venice in Italy and how climate change is forcing the water up so high on these canal streets, in Venice, that it's a real problem. And then not this past week, but the week before, they went to Greenland and they watched how fast the ice is melting in Greenland. And they had a very visual explanation. It's very simple. They went with a scientist who had about a 30-foot-long metal pole, and he drilled way down into the ice, and he put the pole into it. He says, we're going to come back in a year.
Yeah.
And about 26 feet in 1 year of that ice will be gone. And that's how much pole will be up out of the ice. That's how fast it's melting. And so when you think about that much ice melting into the oceans and oceans rising, New York, Miami, East Coast cities are in real trouble. Real trouble.
Look at Hurricane Sandy.
And one of the points this report makes is that it's not going to be New York and Miami first. It'll be areas of Bangladesh. It'll be islands in the South Pacific.
Right. To combat it.
Least positioned to be able to combat it. And very much at the will of larger countries that have been the ones polluting. Like
Daniel Stone with us from National Geographic. You were able to read this report. Where did you find the report? Where can people find the report?
On the UN Environment Program website.